You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week, we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island just like you, and I want to know more about where my tax dollars are going, and I want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us. Well, you know, when you decide to leave a job, your employer sometimes gives you what they call an exit interview. Well, since our public officials work on our behalf, we thought we'd try to do just that today. I'd love to welcome back to the show Congressman Tom Suozzi, who has been representing New York's 3rd Congressional District, including parts of Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk counties. But as you probably know, he gave up his seat to run for governor of New York, and that didn't go as expected. So December 31st is it, right, Congressman Suozzi?
January 3rd, actually, Bill. January 3rd is my last day.
Okay. How does it feel to be back in the seat there?
It's fine. You know, I have no regrets. I have no anxiety. I feel good. I'm optimistic about the future, and I'm ready to move on to the next phase of my life.
Amen. That sounds good. Well, let's talk briefly about the run for governor. Now, why do you think it went the way it did?
I think that, I focused on the issues of crime, which I think is a problem, taxes, which I think is a major problem, and corruption in New York State, which is a major problem. And I think that the governor effectively took the issues of abortion and gun violence and made the race about that. And as the incumbent with a lot of money, she effectively talked about those two issues. And in a Democratic primary, given that what was going on with the Dobbs decision at the Supreme Court level and the shooting up in Buffalo and some of the shootings in Manhattan, gun violence and abortion became the issues, and my issues of crime and taxes and corruption were not as interesting to people. So my issues were better for a general election as opposed to a primary election.
Right. I mean, do you regret stepping away to run?
No, I have no regrets whatsoever. I ran for governor because I think that our state's in trouble because our taxes are too high. I think people are leaving New York State because they can't afford to live here, and they're going to places with low taxes like Florida and other places. And we lost the state and local tax deduction at the federal level because of the Trump tax cuts. So I just felt very strongly we have to address this tax problem. I also feel very strongly that we have to address the crime problem. Some people say, it's not as bad as, the New York Post and the Republicans say it is. But the people still think it's, even if the statistically there's an argument to be made, the people don't feel safe. They're not going back on the subways in New York City. They're not going into Manhattan. They're worried about their families that are living in Manhattan or in the 5 boroughs. So crime and taxes are a real problem, and corruption's always been a problem. I did a thing called fixalbany.com back in I guess that was in the 2000s, about all the corruption in New York State. And when you think about all the governors that have left in scandal, the attorney general, the comptroller, the Shelley Silver, Joe Bruno, Dean Skelos. It just goes on and on with all the different people that have left in scandal.
Yeah, it's quite a hit list.
Yeah, so I feel like taxes, crime, and corruption are the issues in our state. Yeah. And if I hadn't run, and I was watching what was going on in the state with crime on the front page every day, with the lieutenant governor getting arrested for bribery and corruption, with the Buffalo Bills deal, and I wasn't there, I would have been pulling my hair out. Right. So I did what I felt was right, and I got buried. I lost very badly, and now just moving on to the next phase of my life. Yeah.
Well, it's like anything else. You got to take your shot. Right? We say that to actors going on auditions. You said the only thing that I can guarantee is that if you don't go, you won't get the job.
That's right.
So,
and I went through a whole thing. Trade your there's a Rocky song when they say, I forgot Eye of the Tiger, maybe. Trade your passion for glory. Okay, I could have stayed in Congress for a long time, and I like Congress. I don't not like Congress. Right. It's a great honor. It's a great responsibility. I got a lot done. And I could have had the glory of being a Congress member for years. But my passion was I really wanted to fix the problems in the state. Right. So I didn't, people say, are you happy to be out of Congress? Or you're in the minority now and it's so dysfunctional down. I like Congress. I got a lot done. Right. Not that I don't like Congress or I was worried about losing to go in the minority. It's just that I felt that the problems of the state are so big that they had to be addressed.
Right.
And I hope I contributed something to the debate. As we saw in the results of the election, we lost these 4 congressional seats in New York State because the Democrats, in the rest of the country, the Democrats held their own. But in New York State, they lost. Why? Because New York State is not addressing the problems of crime and taxes and corruption, I believe.
Well, I think oftentimes the propaganda wins out as opposed to a real issue. We understand that, if a newspaper decides to make us the murder capital of the world, they can do that by just focusing every day. We read the same type of story, different names, and say, oh, my God, the crime rate's going through the roof. Well, those things were occurring even when the papers weren't writing about it. But now we become aware of it, and all of a sudden that's the flashpoint.
Well, New York State had one of the lowest crime rates in the country.
And there you go. Right.
Basis back in 2019. And we changed a bunch of laws in New York State back in 2019. And we've seen upticks in crime here and elsewhere in the country. And there is a problem with crime. People are afraid.
Oh, yeah. And
it is exacerbated by the fact that the Republicans effectively weaponized the issue back in 2021. Remember, we lost Laura Curran. We lost her as a county executive. She was a very popular county executive. She did a great job. She did a wonderful job, but she lost that race because the Republicans effectively weaponized the crime issue. We lost Tim Sini as the district attorney out in Suffolk County. He's a very popular guy.
Right.
But the Republicans effectively weaponized it. We didn't get the message, and they did the same thing again in 2022, and we lost all these races as a result.
Right.
So, sometimes, you talk about propaganda. Well, that's part of life, too.
Yeah.
We can't just say, oh, they're being so unfair, so let's ignore the issue. You can't do that.
Right.
And people are concerned about crime. There is an uptick in crime. It's not as bad as it was back in the 1990s and 1980s. It's not that bad, but it's bad.
It's one of the first times that I remember people talking about going in to see the tree at Rockefeller Center. And, that conversation starts to happen at the beginning of December, everybody making their plans. And it really is the first time that I remember people expressing that exact thing, that maybe this year we won't go to the city.
It's a real concern. My daughter's living in Manhattan. I lived in Manhattan when I was in the 1980s and early 90s. I remember what it was like. Yeah. I used to take the subway down from the Upper East Side down into Bedford-Stuyvesant. I was working at the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration. I remember what the crime was like in those days.
Yeah.
It's not like it was back then at all. But people are worried it's going to get that way.
Right.
And they're concerned about the homeless people on the streets, mental health issues. They're concerned about that combined with crime. You see the people committing the same crime over and over again with shoplifting and things like that. So, listen, people are concerned. You can't ignore people. You can say, oh, you're wrong. The stats.
Yeah, right. No, that's true.
You can say that all you want, but if people are concerned, they're concerned. So
well, you remember the days when if you were a politician and you were going to do something and it wasn't that it was bad or it just didn't look good. You didn't do it because of appearances.
Yeah.
That nicety seems to have disappeared in the last, I would say, 10 years.
Well, Donald Trump, he does he can do it once.
And that's psychology. I don't get it. I sometimes think that people voted for him because they are so afraid of the world that they believe the thing they have to hurl at it has to be almost the lowest common denominator. We need somebody who has no ethics and has no morals. He can fight that monster. That's the bad.
I don't know that people. I don't know. I don't want to spend my time dwelling on him. The bottom line is that I'm very optimistic about the future.
Okay.
People, people knock all the stuff going on in Washington and wring their hands and all the problems. We passed a major infrastructure bill that people have been talking about for 25, 30 years, right. Couldn't get it done. And we're going to put all this money into building roads and bridges and sewers and broadband for people who don't have broadband and water it's just a remarkable, great accomplishment that was bipartisan. We did a major bipartisan bill to get semiconductor manufacturing in the United States of America. People have been talking about it for years. We did a major bill on addressing climate change for wind and solar and geothermal and all kinds of other positive environmental things we've been talking about for 30 years. Major accomplishment. Right. We did criminal justice reform. We did some gun reform. The biggest bills in 40 years, 30 years. We need to do a lot more, but it was a big major accomplishment.
Right.
So there's so many good things happening. There's a lot more bipartisanship than people talk about.
Right.
You talk about my exit interview. Okay, when I first came into Congress in January of 2017, they gave everybody a book, and they said, "What kind of you can be one of 5 types of members of Congress. There's 5 choices." One, you could be an insider legislative expert and focus on crafting legislation all the time. 2, you can be a inside party player, try and move up the leadership amongst your party. 3, you could be a bomb thrower. You could try and disrupt things and point out what's wrong with everything and try and blow things up. Right. 4, you could be a statesperson. You try and bring people together. You try and rise above the partisanship. You try and work together with people and build consensus. And 5, you could be an ombudsman. You could focus on your district. What are you going to bring home? How are you going to bring the bacon home for your district? So I decided very early on that number one, I was going to be an ombudsman. I was going to focus on bringing money into my district and fixing problems in my district, and I've had tremendous success on the Bethpage Grumman Plume.
Oh, yeah.
On the Long Island Sound, on the Helen Keller National Center, on the Northport VA Hospital, on money for the Glen Cove Hospital, money for different, the roof. It's just so many different, the water systems. I mean, I've had a great success. So I was going to be an ombudsman, focus locally, what matters locally. Mm-hmm. And number 2, you could be a statesperson, which is you try and rise above the party battles, which, as people have established a reputation as being a member of the problem solvers, 29 Democrats, 29 Republicans. We meet regularly to try and find common ground. I'm always trying to bring people together. When I talk about these big bipartisan bills we did, the infrastructure bill, the 4 of the 5 COVID response bills were bipartisan. The last one wasn't, but 4 of the 5 were bipartisan. America did a better job getting through COVID than most places did. New York was crushed compared to other places. I got a lot of money for New York. I got a lot of money for New York hospitals. When they first started handing out the money for hospitals, there was a $100 billion fund. The first tranche of money that went out, more money went to the Texas hospitals, which had 2.5% of the COVID cases, than went to the New York hospitals, which had 35% of the cases. I said, that doesn't make sense because the formula they were using was stupid. I got a bipartisan letter, every Democrat and every Republican in New York State, to write a letter to the Secretary of Health and Human Services and say, listen, you need to create a fund where the money is given to hospitals based on the rate of infection. And we got it. And that money alone from that $10 billion fund, of which $4 billion went to New York hospitals, saved the New York hospitals.
Right.
So when I say I'm optimistic, I'm very optimistic that it's not as bleak as everyone points out about everybody fighting with each other, and all the division and everybody can't stand each other. Between the problem solvers, I was the co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast, if you can imagine that. I was in a bipartisan workout class. I played on the baseball team and the football team. I'm not that good, but I played. All designed to build relationships with my colleagues, both my Democratic colleagues and my Republican colleagues. Right. And I have very great faith that we can get through this crazy time. And there's a lot of good people that will work together to solve problems. Right. And that's the only way you can solve things is by getting people to work across party lines.
Yeah.
I feel about it.
Well, it was funny. My next question was your successes as a congressman. And I think you just listed a whole slew of them.
Listen, I wrote down a list. I'm going to actually write something on this. So I have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment Act, 4 of the 5 COVID bills, CHIPS Act. Oh, the U.S. Canada-Mexico Trade Pact. That was bipartisan, major thing for our economy. The PACT Act, which helped all the veterans that with the burn pits in Agent Orange, and that's a big deal. The gun reform, the criminal justice reform, break the gridlock. there's a thing that I'm very involved with, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. The Chinese Communist Party has people that they are putting in forced labor camps where this is right out of, this is people, it's hard to imagine it's even happening, but they have people that they have in forced labor camps, forced sterilization, forcing people to work in these work camps that make products that actually come to America, which we changed that. You can't buy anything from a particular region of China in the U.S. Surprise billing, Harlem Hellfighters. So, the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Rescue Plan, Navy Grumman and Plume, Long Island Sound. I increased funding for the Long Island Sound from $4 million when I came into office to $40 million when I left, 1,000% increase. I'm the co-chair of the bipartisan Long Island Sound Caucus. I obtained tens of millions of dollars for the VA at Northport, over $1 billion in COVID assistance to state and local municipalities. That was a very big focus of mine. State and local municipalities, catering halls, restaurants, and live music venues. I told you about the hospital thing we did. I changed the flight patterns. They're back to breaking that rule. I'm writing a letter to the FAA right now for the aircraft and helicopters. The Helen Keller Center, Glen Cove Geriatric Center for Excellence, North Hempstead State Beach Park, Little Neck Bay Stormwater Management, North Shore Shellfish Seeding, the Nancy Corp Pump Station, SUNY Maritime Wind Energy Training, the Queens Farm, the roof on the Sid Jacobson Center, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm getting boring with all these things.
No, actually, it's those are the things that I think the constituency wants to know. We'd love to.
I had such a cool experience. I was on Foreign Affairs and Armed Services when I first got into office before they put me on Ways and Means. Ways and Means is the most coveted position to be. It's the only one in the Constitution. But while I was in office, I traveled to Israel several times. I consider myself the strongest non-Jewish pro-Israel Democrat. So I've been very pro-Israel the whole time I've been in office. But while in office, I also went to Kazakhstan, which has got a 5,000-mile border with Russia and with China, and it's a very important strategic ally for us, where they have these very tough neighbors, Russia and China. They want to be more close to us. While they can't offend China and Russia, it's a very strategic partner for us. But I went to India, I went to Pakistan, I went to South Korea, I went to Afghanistan several times, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Australia, all on building relationships with strategic allies of ours. I worked on a lot of stuff with Northern Ireland after Brexit. And the stuff that I worked on, I didn't get it done, but it laid the groundwork on the state and local tax deduction, a thing for senior citizens related to long-term care. I'd say the most frustrating thing for me is immigration reform, because it's so obvious to me that there's a deal to be cut to fix the porous border and to help all these people that are suffering in our country that have been here for 20 or 30 years. I'm going to keep on working on that even when I'm out of office. Because we got to fix the border and we got to help these people.
Yeah. Well, just a reminder to the listening audience that you are listening to this week's Long Island News on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and my guest today is Congressman Tom Suozzi, who's been representing New York's 3rd Congressional District, including parts of Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk counties, but is leaving Congress at the end of the month. Actually, January 3rd, you said.
January 3rd. Yeah. So I've been in Congress for 6 years, Bill. Mm-hmm. Great honor, great responsibility. Loved it. I was county executive in Nassau County for 8 years. Yeah. Great experience. Accomplished a tremendous amount. I was mayor of my hometown, Glen Cove, for 8 years. Great experience. I'm trained as a lawyer and a CPA. I worked for Arthur Anderson, Sherman and Sterling. I worked for Lazard Frere, big investment banking firm in between county executive and Congress. I've won a lot of races. I've been in a lot of elections over the years. I forget the number now. It's like I have like 15 wins and 4 losses, I think. I can't remember now. Wow. So I got to check. But, I lost to Elliot Spitzer for governor. Look what happened to him. Yeah. I lost to Ed Mangano. Look what happened to him. So the rule is you can run against me, but if you beat me, you're in a lot of trouble.
Certainly looks that way.
I'm worried about Kathy Hochul. What's going to happen?
Oh, that's wild. Oh, well, now the other thing is, and that was the biggie that we had talked about, was that SALT tax cap. Long Islanders, we've been talking to some people about it, and someone mentioned that that's gonna be there for 3 years, whether we like it or not.
Well, it expires. It goes back to the way it was supposedly, hopefully, in 2025, the end of 2025.
Okay.
That the Republicans will try and put it in place again. And quite frankly, a lot of Democrats may try it on the far left, may try and put it back in place again. They don't realize, they say this is only for rich people. Well, on Long Island, if you're making $150,000 a year between a husband and a wife, or even $200,000 a year, you're not rich.
Not rich, no.
You're not suffering, but you're not rich. And that was a major hit to the gut for a lot of those folks. And for the people that are wealthy people, a lot of them are just leaving. A lot of people have just moved to Florida.
Right.
They took their money and they left.
Yeah.
And they want to come back in the summertime, and they'll fly up, they'll rent a house, but they don't pay the tax. So what happens is we're losing all these wealthy people who pay our taxes. Right. They pay the bulk of the state income taxes and the bulk of the local property taxes. If they leave, those wealthy people leave, who's stuck holding the bag? Yeah. The rest of us are who our taxes are already killing us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's hurting a lot of folks that are solid middle class folks. I'm talking about people who make $100,000, $200,000.
I think it's hurting everybody up and down the line, just because, talking to some of the politicians, that SALT, the way that they had it set up before, meant an extra $15 billion to the Long Island economy.
Correct.
So that covers everybody. That's just
absolutely right.
And I think that's one of the things that we all need to. We got screwed. We really did get screwed.
That was Trump, and that was the Republican majority. Some of the Republicans didn't vote for it. Peter King, when he was there, he didn't vote for it.
Right.
I don't even think Lee Zeldin voted for it at the time. But when I wanted to try and get it back, I got a lot of support from Peter King and some other Republicans and a whole bunch of Democrats. But I got a lot of pushback from a lot of Republicans and from some Democrats. Who were saying, we don't want to subsidize your state, or that's only good for the rich people. Even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't support it. It's only good for rich people. It's subsidized. I said, no, it doesn't subsidize the rich. It subsidizes New York State.
Yeah, right.
We pay taxes.
How can you divide it? I see $15 billion for an area.
That's absolutely, you're the right way of looking at it.
Imagine everybody living in that area is going to be affected by the lack of $15 billion in an economy.
You're absolutely right. You're 100% right. And New York State's the biggest net donor to the federal government. We send more to the federal government than we get back more than any other state. And we are slowly declining. When I was born, New York State, 1962, 60 years old. When I was born, New York State had 45 members of Congress. Today, we have 27 members of Congress, and on January 3rd, we go down to 26 members of Congress. We are slowly losing influence because we are losing relative population to the rest of the country. While Texas and Florida and South Carolina and North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona are growing, New York is stagnant or shrinking. And so as a result, we're losing influence. Now, we're very fortunate. We've got Chuck Schumer as the majority leader of the Senate, and now we've got Hakeem Jeffries as the leader of the Democrats in the House. That'll save us for a while. But we have got to figure out how to make our state more attractive so people want to live here. And the people who are not leaving to go to Florida, Texas, and North Carolina and South Carolina.
I also think we have to make the state more attractive to the people in political parties that would hammer us, not realizing that we're footing the bill.
That's right.
For such a large proportion of the country. You have people screaming and yelling that, this stinks and that. Okay, I'll tell you what. The next time New York goes to pay their tax bill, we'll just keep it. How about we just keep it in New York State? Because that'll make us flush for quite a few years.
There's a lot of people who don't like New York State in other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And it's a constant battle to defend our state. And we've got to constantly do that. And we need to band together, Democrats and Republicans in our state, to fight for New York State. Yeah. We've got to make New York State more attractive for people to stay here and for people to move here. Now, people like moving to, young people like moving to Manhattan and to Brooklyn, but we need the whole state to be attractive. Right. And it's not attractive because the taxes are too high. We went through 20, 30 years of people fleeing upstate New York. Right. If you cut off north of Putnam and Rockland County, it would be one of the poorest states of the United States of America if it was its own state, north of Putnam and Rockland County. We have to make it so New York State's more competitive. We've got to make it more attractive as far as our taxes go, because we may not get SALT back. So
yeah, right. Well, I mean, is there any chance that if it's going to supposedly go back the way it was in 2025, is anybody going?
That'll be a new fight.
Right. I think it'll be a whole nother battle again.
Yeah, because it costs a lot of money to give us that deduction. Mm-hmm. Even though it's the first deduction that has ever existed in the United States federal tax code. When they first said we're going to create federal taxes, federal taxes is a new thing. States all had taxes, but the federal government didn't have taxes, income taxes. They had like tariffs for customs duties and things like that when people imported things. That's how they got their money. They said, well, listen, we need more money. We got to create an income tax. The governors of the states and the mayors of the cities said, no. You can't tax at the federal level. That'll stop us from doing what we need to do at our local level. Mm-hmm. And the federal government said, okay, we'll make a deal. We'll create the federal income tax, but we'll give you a deduction for your state and local taxes, so you're not paying taxes on taxes you've already paid.
Right.
First deduction. Come 100 years later, Donald Trump and the GOP needs money to pay for the tax cuts for the corporations and the other tax cuts they did. They said, we're going to get rid of the state and local tax deduction. That created $600 billion, which they instead gave over to the corporations. And Trump's position was, hey, they're not going to vote for me in New York anyway. They're not going to vote for me in New York and New Jersey and California and Illinois and these other Democratic states that have high taxes. Yeah. Why do we have high taxes? We have high taxes because we have unions. It costs more money because people get higher wages and benefits for our teachers and our civil servants and other construction people. And we have high taxes because of that. We have high taxes because we have the lowest rate of uninsured people in the country. Texas and Florida have the highest rate of uninsured children, the highest rate of uninsured adults in the country, because we have the subway system and other mass transit system, Long Island Railroad. They don't have that in Florida and Texas. Right. Their infrastructures, Florida, their whole grid shut down. I mean, California, Texas's grid shut down when it got cold out. And they don't have sewers in a lot of Florida. They have a big problem with nitrogen going out into their water, into the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean, because they don't have sewers. It's all septic systems. Yep. So our infrastructure, our mass transit, our insurance of children, our unions, our schools, they all cost more money. That's why we have higher taxes. It's worked pretty well for us. We got the best, most generous contribution to the federal government in taxes of any state in the country. Why? Because our economy is so much stronger than everywhere else.
Right. Well, you heard it first here from Congressman Tom Suozzi. And we'd like to talk more about it, but the clock on the wall is screaming at me. So I just want to let the listening audience know that my guest today has been Congressman Tom Suozzi. And thank you again for taking time to talk to us and making yourself available to appear on the show. And you're still going to be in there for a little while, so maybe we'll get to talk to you again. And certainly after that, even, I'd love to get your take on some of the things that occurred while you were in the middle of the mix there.
All right, my friend. Thanks very much, pal.
Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Thanks, buddy.
The clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to get on out of here. I'm Bill McIntyre, and remember, you can listen to us every Friday at 3 p.m. right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.